This is Gemara Nazir Daf Samoch. Hey, exciting days in the world of Daf Yomi as Baruch Hashem. We close in on yet another incredible, as we finalize the last two daf of Meseches Nazir, Baruch Hashem. Saita on the horizon, a little bit of an easier, a little bit of a more, as some say, Geshmak Gemara. So as always, invite a friend and let's learn more Torah together. So we pick it up in the Mishnah on Samach Daled Amud Beis, and today is going to be one big tangent. To even understand why we're here is difficult, and the reason is, in the previous daf and a half, we've been discussing Raglayim Ledavar. What is the status of a suffix? We had the floating Tumah yesterday, and whether the suffix in such a case, the din of tar is din of tameh. So on that nikuda, on that detail, we dive even deeper in the laws of Tumah, trying to figure out what is the status of Tumah v'Tayra in different scenarios. So says the Mishnah, Hamoitzi mace. Someone who finds a mace. You didn't know there's supposed to be a mace in a particular area, and lo and behold, you dig up a dead body. Betchila, for the first time, Mushkav kidarkoi. If it's lying in the normal manner. Now, what does it mean, kidarkoi? What is the normal manner of a mace? And what it means by the normal manner of a mace, it means the way that Yidden generally bury mason. And as the Mefarish, the Rivanir points out, what does it mean? It means it's not lying down, the head is not between the legs, it's not being killed, as we will see in Mirza Hashem, but rather it is stretched out with the arms folded over the body in the way that generally we bury the mace. So says the Mishnah, so if you find this body, now you have reason to assume that this is a Yiddish body. What is the halacha? Noitloi. You're allowed to reintern it. You're allowed to move it and bury it elsewhere. There's no reason to assume this is a permanent grave, so you can rebury it. And you have to take the tfusa, the area that it grabs hold, the ground underneath this mace, because we assume the mace to be a yid, so the ground underneath it has to be reburied with the mace. Shnayim, let's say you find two corpses, again, Naitalan vest tfusasan. You're allowed to rebury them and their tfusa in the area on which they are lying on. Matzah shleisha. But once you find three corpses, now the halacha changes. Im yesh bein zeh lezeh. If there is an area between this one and that one, from one corpse to the next, midalad amos vad shemaina, between 4 and 8 amos, harei zeh shchunas kfarim. And what's needed to know a little bit, a halacha that we'll deal more with in Gemara Bava Basra, Mirza Hashem, is that when they would bury mason, they would bury them one after another, and then they would have another line up and up. So the basic nikuda is, how do we know if this is an area that is a grave? Obviously, we're not discussing that there's marked graves, because then you would know there'd be a line of graves. But what they would do is they'd have one line this way, and one line this way, and then one line on this side. And therefore, if there's a space between 4 and 8 amos, then we could assume that this is a verified graveyard. This is an area in which the mason are buried, and therefore the entire area has to be assumed to contain Tumah, because we assume that there are Jews buried in this area. So these are really the two halachas that are really going to be the focus of part one, we'll call it, of today's daf. Is number one, this halacha of noitloi vest fusasai. Number one is the halacha that a yid, when it's buried, the area, the ground underneath where he's buried, has the din, has the status of the body itself, the same level of tumah. And number two is, once you have a certain specific number of bodies, like we're seeing over here, once you have 3 within 14 amos, that indicates you're in a graveyard, and therefore the entire area is assumed to be tameh until you're able to actually verify that it is tahar. And of course, an afkamina is going to be any person that walks there is assumed to be tameh. Now, continues the Mishnah as we move over to Samachayam and Aleph, Baidei Keimenu Ulahalon Esrinama. You have to search from the place that you know there are mason, you know there are dead bodies, for 20 amos to see if there are more dead bodies. If you found one dead body, now you assume that the graveyard is continuing. So Tumah is in that area as well. So then, you continue looking 20 amos. Says the Mishnah, you have to keep on looking 20 amos. Why? Sharaglayim ledavar. Because there is, I apologize that there's a little bit of a line on your screen. Says the Mishnah, Sharaglayim ledavar, she'ilu techila. If it was the first time that there was a grave here, umatzay v'natlai ve'es tfusasai. The Raglayim ledavar is, Sharaglayim ledavar, period. I read that incorrectly. One more time. So if you find a body within 20 amos and within 20 amos, we have to keep assuming that there is tumah over there. Why? Sharaglayim ledavar, that the graveyard continues. However, she'ilu tchila matzai, because if it was the first time finding a grave, then wouldn't have a din of a beis hakvaros of a proper graveyard. So we're seeing over here is there's two stages. Stage number one is you find the corpse. You assume there is a corpse here, and you don't have to assume there's much more than a corpse here. So this corpse has tumah, and obviously the area underneath it. Once you find three within 48 amos, now you have to assume that the entire area is one big graveyard. Now you have to assume the whole area is mitame until you check within 20 amos and you find that there is no longer any bodies. Then you'd be allowed to assume that it is tehira. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, Matzah. The first din of the Mishnah said that you find a mace b'tchila. So it says the Gemara quotes Rav Yehuda that prat lematzui mace. What does it mean that you found a mace? This comes to exclude if you knew, if it's a matzui, you knew that there was, I keep on reading it wrong, Matzah is prat lematzui. You found, and not that it was known to you. If it's known to you, it's a different story. Mace, you found the mace. Prat lahareg, someone who was killed. Mushchav, lying down. Prat yoshev, excluding a corpse that is sitting. Kedarka, in its general manner, as we explained, the hands folded over the chest. Prat l'sheroishay munach ben yarkusev, excluding if its head of the corpse is between its legs. And these are all manners in which we will see the Goyim would bury and not the Yidden. Tani Ula Bar Chanina explains Ula Bar Chanina, Meisha Chasar Ein Eloi Tfusa. If a mace is lacking, what does it mean it's lacking? It's not a complete dead body. Part of it is missing. It does not have a din of a Tfusa, which again was din number one of the Mishnah, that the area underneath the mace is assumed to be Tameh. V'loi shchunas kvarim, and it will not have the din even if you find three of them that has a din of a graveyard, the entire area. V'chol hani mai taima loi. Ask the Gemara and all of these, what is the reason that they're not included? What is the reason if it's killed? What is the reason if it's sitting? What is the reason if the head is between the legs? In all these scenarios, what is the reason it does not have a din of tfus, does not have a din of shchunas kvarim? Amrinan explains the Gemara. Dilma oived koichavemu. As we explained, because it might be a guy, and the only din of toma, of course, is if we're dealing with a yid. We continue 10 lines down. First word line is koichavemu, 2 dots. Matzah shnayim. Now the Mishnah said you found 2 corpses, but now we have a brisa that elaborates a bit more. If the head of one corpse is by the legs of the next, and the head of the next corpse is by the legs of the next one, again, this is an indication that this is not a Jewish graveyard, and therefore it's not going to have a din of tfus, that the area underneath is tamei, nor is it going to have a din of that the area is a graveyard. Now, why does it have a din of an area as a graveyard? Not necessarily because it's not Yiddish, but rather because the haphazard manner that you're finding the multiple mesim indicates that there's not more mesim here. Indicates that it's not really a graveyard. Motza shleisha. Now, what happens? You found 3. So the Mishnah taught us that once you find 3, you assume it to be a beis hakvaros. But says the Braisa, Ho'echad yoidua ushnayim techila. 2, 1 you knew about, and 2 you found for the first time. Ishnayim techila, you found 2 for the first time. Ishnayim yaduim, and you knew that there were 2 mason here. Meaning, it's not a case that you discovered 3 mason for the first time. What's the status? Says the Braisa, ein lahem tfusa. There's no din of tfusa of the area underneath it. Ein lahem shchunas kvaros, nor is there din of shchunas kvaros. The reason being that since this is a little bit of a difficult svara, but since you knew about some of them, you did not find all 3 for the first time. Therefore, we assume that the bodies were buried here in a very temporary manner, and therefore what? That's the difficulty. Because the way that we have our Gemara, as we just read it, was ein lahem tfusa. There's no din of tfusa. Well, why not? As we learned in the Mishnah, even if it's temporary, the area underneath it still is tamei. You're just allowed to bury it with that land underneath it. So over here, the Rosh changes the girsa to yesh lahem tfusa ve'ein lahem shchunas kvaros. That it has a tfusa, and actually the truth is the Mesiris Shas, which let me just pull up, everyone can see on the side of your page, in this little gimel, says girsa is the word yesh. You put in yesh instead of ein. So it has a din of tfusa, but it's no din of shchunas kvaros because it's temporary. Therefore, we don't assume that the entire area is full of mason. The Gemara proves this with a maisa. Says the Gemara, maisa, there was a story about every yeshivav shebadak umatzah. He checked and he found 2 shnayim yaduim, 2 bodies that they knew about vechad chila ubikish lasais shchunas kvaros. So he found 3 bodies. He thought, okay, we have to assume the whole area is tamei. I'm going to Rabbi Kiva kol shigata l'reik yagata. Whatever you're doing is l'reik. It's for nothing. L'amar shchunas kvaros el legimel yaduin oil shleish l'tchila. But in any scenario that you knew about 1 or 2 originally, and then you found 1 or 2 more, does not have a din of shchunas kvaros. And we continue 10 lines from the bottom, quoting the 2 dots in Natalon ve'es tfusasan. That what was the din in the Mishnah that you take them and the tfusa and the area underneath it? Asks the Gemara, Hechi dami tfusa. What exactly is the area underneath there? Precise. How much? How much land? Precise, etc. Explains the Gemara, Rav Yehuda Amar Kra unusasani b'mitzrayim. Yaakov Avinu says, I should say better. Yeah, Yaakov Avinu tells Yosef, carry me out of Mitzrayim. From here we darshan toli me, take with me. Kamashir, how much? Tfusa. Kamashir tfusa, excuse me. Pirush Avalaz Rav Sadik Neitel Afar Tichuach v'Chayfer B'Tchila Gimel Etzbais. You take the soft land underneath the body and you dig down 3 fingers into the ground and you take the ground with it. Asks the Gemara, makes it Kamashir tfusa, says the Braisa, how much? Pirush Avalaz Rav Sadik. And you know how much you have to take anytime you take a body? You have to take the kisbin, the chips of wood that are there, and the clumps of earth, and you could discard what is certainly not from the body. Because anything that has a suffix, you leave. And the rest of that which you're not sure is and anything else that you're not sure is misarif to the majority of the opinion of the body, or to have the requisite amount of bones, or the ladle full of corpse dust, as we've learned. That's what the rest of the area around it. So I asked the Gemara, what do we see over here? Doesn't mention anything about digging 3 fingers down and taking the earth. Answers the Gemara, Hu di Amar ki ay Tana, the Tana v'kam tfusa. Our Tana, Rav Elazar holds like this Tana that says how much is the share of the tfusa. Rav Yechon Azai, in the virgin earth, Shleisha Etzba'is, and that is whom Rav Elazar is going like. So Baidike Emanu, the Mishnah taught us that once you find 3 corpses, what is the status? Now you have to be Baidik. Now you have to check. Now you have to ensure that there are no other corpses there, for the simple reason, because until you know that there are not, we assume that this area has the din of a shchunas kvarais and everything is going to be tamei. Asks the Gemara as we turn over to Samachayim and Beis, Amar Rava badak upana. Says Rava, if he checked and he found the body and he removed it. Badak, he checked again, Upan, and he removed the body. Badak, he checked again, Ve'ashkach, and he found the third body. So what's the status now? Do we say if he keeps on checking every 20 amos and finding a body and a body and a body, that the whole area gets a din of a shchunas kvaros? Says the Gemara, Lo yahai mifane legabi hanach trey. The third body, you can't move to where the first two bodies are. V'lohani trey, and these two, legabi haichad, cannot be moved to where this one body is, even though if it would have a din of a real shchunas kvaros, it would have a din of basic kvaros, you would not be able to move the bodies, because you can't move a body unless it's temporary by nature. It says Rava Chiddush, the fact that you didn't find all three in one time, you're allowed to keep on removing them. Just make sure that, just make sure that you don't put all three in one situation. Another way of learning, Amar Rava, Kimishanin Rishos, Lefanoi, since you're allowed to clear out the area, Mafana Lohaim Blashavinu Shchunas Kvaros. You're allowed to clear it out. Excuse me, Mafana Lohaim. You're allowed to clear it out. Asks the Gemara, why are you allowed to clear it out? But if as you're clearing it out, you find the third body, find the third grave, that should give the entire area a status of a shchunas kvaros. So Amar Reish Lakish, like we just said, Ilo Matzav Tiaru Eretz Yisrael, a special kula. The source of this kula is not necessarily perfectly clear, but a special kula that we don't allow all the bodies to combine and make the entire area tamei. Says the Gemara, what on the flip case? Let's say you checked it, you didn't find any bodies. My Amar Menashia Bar Yirmiyah, Amar Rav, Shchunas Kvaros my Taima, Amar Reish Lakish, Ila Matzav Tiaru Es Eretz Yisrael. Now, that line is a very debatable line, so let's not read that line. 1 second. Amar Menashia Bar Yirmiyah, Amar Rav, Shchunas Balti Mesman V'lo Matzah. My, what's the din? Amar Menashia Bar Rav Yirmiyah Merav Shchunas Kvaros. It has the din of a Shchunas Kvaros. Meaning, if you look within 20 amos and you find, then the Chayra has a din of 20 of a Shchunas Kvaros. Now this last line of my timer, Reish Lakish says, Matzav Tiaris Yisrael, is very difficult, because he just answered it has a din of Shchunas Kvaros, which is Chomer, which is a stringency. Now you're telling me a kula, so you get rid of this last line. We're going to do just the next Mishnah piece of Gemara, and then the next Mishnah we're going to leave for tomorrow for the final shiur on the Masechta. Says the Mishnah, continuing the theme of Safek Tumah, etc., called Safek Negayim. There's a Safek in a Nega. Nega is Mitzaras. You come to the Kayin, he looks at it, and he says, he looks at it, and he says, you have to wait, we're not sure what the status is. So then either he confirms it, he sends you out of the Machaneh, or he makes you wait again. But what happens if it's a suffix? You're not sure. The Kohen's not sure. Did this splotch on your skin spread or not? Says the Mishnah, B'tzchila tahar, ad shlo nizkak l'tama. Until they make the person tamei, we say suffix is l'kula, and you will not become a mitzayra. But mishnizkak l'tama, sveikai tamei. So says the Gemara, what it has to do over here is, if you have a suffix before he's confirmed to be Tamei, we're going to be Mekel. If you have a suffix after he's confirmed to be Tamei, then we're going to be Machmir. Says the Gemara, Minahani, immediately where do we know this? From Amar Yehuda Merav Amar Kra. Says the Torah, L'tarai or L'tamai, with regard to a Mitzayra, that what? The Torah says, as we see the pasuk over here, Zois Torahs, Neget Tzeras, Bekanatem Rabishtem Ai, Hashtei Erev Vaikli, or litarai or litamai. So the fact that the Torah lists litarai first, says the Gemara, shows us what? So it shows that until we have a confirmed status of Tumah, we're going to allow a suffix to be tahar. Ask Gemara, if you're learning it out from the pasuk, then even once he is tamei, nami sveiku tahar, suffix should still be tahar. Ella says the Gemara, you're right. Kitmar Rav Yehuda Merav, aha itmar. When did Rav Yehuda Merav say the din of l'tar or l'tamoi on a different case? They said on the following case, Beheres comes with Seir Lavan, Tamei. Now Beheres and Seir Lavan are two different types of negaim listed by the Torah, different types of splotches. So if the Baharis splotch came before the white hair, then the Baharis is Tameh. If he first has a white hair and then he gets a splotch, he is Tar. Suffolk, if we're not sure which came first, Tameh. For Rabbi Yeshua, Omer Keah. Says Rabbi Yeshua Keah. What does Keah mean? Literally means it's faint. My Keah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Keah Vitar. Says, how do you know? Maybe it means it's faint and it's Tameh. So on this din, when I'm misopik, if Bahares, Kaidin, let's say you're loving, or say loving, because of Bahares, to the splotch come before the white hair come before the splotch. In this din, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Amar Karla Ta'aroi, in this case, we're going to be Mekel, but in reality, we did not really circle back around and figure out why in the Mishnah the suffix is going to be Tar. But we'll pick it up tomorrow, concluding Nazir and concluding these dinim of Tumah V'Tayra B'Siyata Dishmaya.